there's unfunded mandates that are coming at us from the state that kind of tips our hand as far as what we have to do on the technology side.
One of the questions I got was, is there political will to change QBE? Since QBE was created in 1885, there have been seven blue ribbon task forces to come up with creative solutions for QBE. 3 years ago, they came up with one, and when they got done studying it for 18 months, the lead chair, the chair came back and said, this is too complicated and I'm not going to change the formula. They came up with something called IE squared, which basically allowed a school system to have tremendous flexibility, but with also increased accountability. And only 2 systems took that up. Gwinnett was the lead on that, and they have had tremendous flexibility in how they spend the dollars. There is supposed to be legislation this year that would allow other systems to have that same type of flexibility and get rid of IE squared. The most recent education task force actually did make some progress, and that is that until last year, and those recommendations from this task force are starting to trickle into legislation. Until last year, school nurses were funded solely out of the tobacco settlement funds that came in from a settlement from many years ago, and there was only $30 million allocated across the state to help fund school nurses. And that $30 million sat in this little bucket right there, and everybody looked at that bucket and said, the hospitals especially said, well, why can't we have those funds? The schools don't need that. And we had a big campaign to fight, and the governor actually took that funds and was going to give them to the hospitals until schools around the state had a campaign to make the state legislature aware of how important school nurses are. That came out in this funding, and so now they've actually incorporated funding for nurses into QBE. So there have been some minor tweaks that are coming out right now. That's one. They're going to change how they fund school counselors to increase or decrease the student-teacher ratio or the counselor-student ratio on that. So there are some minor tweaks, but as far as the overall formula, they are not. They're not brave enough probably to tweak it. It is a very, very complex formula, and I will tell you that most people don't really even know all the components that go into it and how it all is factored.
Thank you. The question is, how are concession stands related to an educational purpose? The Constitution mandates projects be for an educational purpose. And one of the things I stated earlier is that what we're addressing is ADA issues and accessibility. For example, we're allowed to build new schools. Those are clearly for an educational purpose. Would we build those without restrooms that are ADA accessible? No. The next question is, $38 million will not be enough to rebuild Walton. Is it bait to get this community to vote for another SPLOST? The answer is no, it's not bait. Secondly, we're also looking at a rebuild of Osborne High School. And I can tell you is that community has not been vocal about we need a new school. Okay, it's doing the right thing for the community. As far as the budget is concerned, $38 million, it's not far from what it takes to build a brand new school. And secondly, when we go back and we do a project like Walton, for example, if SPLOST does pass, one of the things is that you're not replacing the football stadium. You're not replacing the baseball field. You're not replacing certain elements of the school that are already there, so it would not necessarily be the same level of dollar expenditures that we would see at other schools.
When will equalization grants be addressed for the funding of COP sends to less affluent counties? Equalization is kind of 2 parts. The first, what equalization does, first there is the part of equalization that people think of, which is in order to qualify to get funding from the state, each county, each school district has to raise 5 mills of taxes. And that first 5 mils that you raise in your property taxes goes to the state as your contribution, or your saying that I'm in this as a partner with you for education. That 5 mils is a significant chunk for Cobb County. It's, what are we at, 140 at that now? 140 million? It's about $140 million that we raise. 5 mils in like Putnam City, which is another school district, 5 mils raises about $70,000. So there's a very big disparity between what a mill will raise in each respective school district. There is a often confusion that says, well, why can't, what are we going to get back from that? And what equalization really is it is the state looks and says, what can each school district raise? And they create an average. They've now created, as a recent change in how they do this, they've created a statewide average when they rank all of the school districts and say the 180 school districts and say, this is the statewide average. And those who are above that average get nothing back from equalization. But those who are below that average get some percentage of funding from the state to help bring up their overall property, their value, how much money they can actually use towards education. And for some, and especially in our very, very rural areas, that is their lifeline. That equalization plus the QBE funding that they get from the state plus sparsity grants comprises about 90% of their budget, because they don't really, doesn't matter how many mills they charge, they're not going to raise that much money. So we look at it and people say, why can't we cap it? I will tell you that there's no political will anywhere in the state to cap and say, okay, Cobb County, you only have to submit 100 million rather than 140 million. So there's really kind of two parts to what people think of, and that 5 mil contribution is just our kicking in is what we have to pay to get money back from the state.
Looks like we're running close to our time, so we're going to take a couple more questions. How are you, and this is more of a budget-related question, how are you planning to raise teacher salaries, hire more teachers to fill the new schools and classrooms, decrease furlough days when SPLOST 4 cannot pay for these things? I'm open to suggestions. Okay, and I don't mean that tongue-in-cheek. Karen's done a very good job of articulating things. I know that you have information in front of you, and I'll just net it out this way. The school district for many years has been seeing further declines in funding and greater demands on what we have to deliver. And I'll tell you what, the teachers and the administrators and everybody in this school district do a remarkable job. And my hat's off to you, because I know that you've just been under the wire here. Currently, what we're looking at, and you hear about an $80 million budget shortfall. That $80 million budget shortfall is predicated on a restoration of a 180-day school year. I think there was only 23 systems in the entire state that were able to deliver a 180-day school year. If you've been following what's been going on in DeKalb County has depleted their reserve fund, which means that they're going to struggle to make payroll this year. Okay. Third largest school system in our state. That's potentially the future of Cobb County. That's how dire this is. Okay. We don't have the tools at our disposal from a funding mechanism to address these issues. Karen hinted at it earlier, 90% of the funding goes to salaries and benefits. When we look at other areas, and again, it's about an $830 million budget that we have for maintenance and operations. 90% of that is going to salaries and benefits. 10% of it takes care of transportation, takes care of lights, takes care of maintenance, takes care of all these other things. And as you go through it, it gets sliced away pretty quickly. The state of Georgia is in a very, very difficult situation. They're in debt to the federal government to the tune of about $800 million for unemployment insurance compensation. The Medicaid issue alone is anticipated to be about $500 to $800 million as well. What you heard Karen talk about earlier is very true. Although it appears that the district is getting more money, the truth is that we're getting less and less money for curriculum and instruction. There's another thing at the federal level, which is hanging over our heads. It's called sequestration. I was recently in Washington, D.C., speaking with Senator Chambliss' office, Senator Isaacson's office, Congressman Price's office, and Congressman Gingry's office. And one of the things that they're anticipating is that there's going to be another continuing resolution that's going to provide funding at least for a year, but after that year, that there will be an impasse in sequestration.